is one of the most famous beaches in Brazil. And this building you can see on the left side, the spring. Strand, das ist einer der bekanntesten Strände in Brasilien. Und militärische Gebiete, alle Gebäude in der Umgebung sind militärische Gebäude.
Agora tem um. Pois é, acabou de ver.
One of the exercises is there about the focus.
Ay, yo lo vi, qué increíble.
Que foi? Mostra pra mim.
Você tá achando que é latino-americana?
Eres latina. ¿Quieres agua?
Claro, pero tengo que ver, estoy cargando el motor. Ese panorama. Airport. Okay, this airport only receives domestic flights.
Sim, almoça, bebê, babá, depois.
¿Dónde va a quedar aquí?
At the park exit, you will find QR code. We hope to see you again. En la salida del parque.
Amigos, fazer o da 40?
En algunos minutos vamos a pasar por el Palacio Guanabara. De Corcovado, 710 metros sobre el nivel del mar y pesa 1140 toneladas. El Cristo de la Parte and comes to Santa Teresa. Los rieles que están en la calle son kaufen möchten. Wir können, wenn wir zurückkommen.
When is that line too for the photo? Yeah.
Yeah, you know. He's gone?
Pelo para trás.
No, yo sé.
No, it's not the same. So I asked where it comes from, but if it's from
BFM Info.
A gente dá um pai no Jackson, bem legal. Vai procurando mais tarde, Now we come back and stop here, take a little walk.
Okay.
Okay? But the sums are very okay, it's good. See, it's nice. And then there are some.
É muito rápido. Então nem é tentar resgatar. Não tinha como resgatar o cara.
So we've been downtown. Here is this. So downtown. salary is better, you know. Look at him. I'll take one of them.
E aquele momento que tinha perdido meu bom rapaz. Vem parar, não vai, não vai.
The interior is made with green marble that was is very known in Brazil. Cinema's bankrupted. That is the only cinema left here. That's why they made the square after him in Rio. A concert with chamber music. Okay. Okay. Deixa eu só parar aqui. That is the Petrobras building. Petrobras is the Brazil gas now.
Ah.
The monks, before the mass starts, they sang in Latin. That stay in the north part of this.
Vai pra pertinho. Não vou embora não, mano. Fica